Welcome to another episode of the Train the Trainer podcast, in which I try to bridge the gap between science and practice and science. Today I have a conversation with Professor Peter Beek. He is a professor of coordination dynamics at the Department of Human Movement Sciences at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, where he served as a dean for 12 years. Since 2017, he has been the coordinator of scientific support for swimming at InnoLab, the Tongelreep, and the KNZB, that's a swim organization. He's a full professor, faculty of behavioral and movement sciences and biomechanics. Between 2011 and 2013, he published a highly influential series of articles on new insights into motor learning, including implicit learning, external focus of attention, differential learning, and more. He recently returned with a 9-part series of articles with an update on motor learning. So Peter, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us about motor learning. And did I miss something, or do you want to introduce yourself in another way?
Well, thanks for having me. I was always interested in motor learning and the development of expertise. So my PhD thesis is about juggling, as you might know.
Mm-hmm.
And how that came about is interesting because I thought of testing Smith's schema theory at the time. And I said, well, juggling could be a good task for that. For instance, you could use differently weighted balls and different patterns and see how schemas for juggling would evolve. But I said, well, first you have to know a little bit more about the task. So what type of task is juggling, and what defines good juggling, and what defines superior juggling? So that is what I started to investigate. So I never came to the issue of learning in my thesis as such, other than comparing expert performances with intermediate performances. And I think that's an important point because, in task learning, it's very important to know something about the tasks. The juggling has the nice property that the more balls you juggle, the less space there is for maneuver, so to speak. So the task constraints are quite severe, and become more severe if you reach to 9, 11, and even 13 balls, as people now do these days. You have to throw them up very high, but if you have a little deflection in the error in the angle with which you throw, then the ball goes off and you cannot catch it anymore. And also, time-wise, the tosses and the catches should be equidistant in time as much as possible to make this feasible.
Yeah.
So I described that in my thesis. And it's reflecting my interest in the issue of expertise and the development of expertise, and hence motor learning. And in the series that you're referring to, I started writing those later on in my career. First, after the National Coach Platform of 2010, I believe.
Yeah. Correct, yeah.
And then my first series, and then just this April, I did the second National Coach Platform while writing the second series. And the idea of the series is, there's still a substantial gap between what is being done in practice and what is known in science. So that's one point. And you can look at that gap differently. I'm not saying that what's the scientific literature on motor learning learns you should be immediately transferred to practice. I'm a bit reluctant for that, also because in all these comparisons that I made of learning methods, oftentimes the differences are quite small. So there are many ways in which you can learn something. I'm in the human brain. It's a wondrous machine, and it will take whatever information it can lay hands on to, to learn something. But I always found it interesting to question, if we can compare method A with method B, how can we improve method A relative to method B to have deep learning? That is to say, learning with a high degree of retention and a high degree of transfer. You can also introduce the element of learning quickly, which would be another criteria.
Yeah.
There's a guy on YouTube, Jim Quick. His name. Quick, he has not. He's really born under this name, and he's concerned with fast learning. But also there you find issues that are relevant. But I think for learning, and especially in the development of expertise, learning fast takes on a different form. Because you can only become an expert by years of experience and so on specific tasks.
Yeah. Yeah, you say so many important things. The first one, I want to recap that the difference between methods can be small. So in medicine, we say they are statistically significant but clinically irrelevant. No, not irrelevant, small. That's an important point, I think. Because otherwise you get all those camps, like we do better this and that is far more better than that, but we're all learning.
Yeah, I think there's in my interactions with Scott Kelso, the guy of the finger experiments, he always emphasized that his model for these finger movements was a parsimonious model in which theory and data developed together. I think that's an important point. If you have a theory, make sure that you have sufficient empirical evidence that the main points of that theory are also covered by your evidence. And what I see is a mismatch oftentimes, that the theory is much larger than what has been tested. And if you look at the tests, more often than not, critical remarks can be made about those tests. And in learning, you always have questions. Okay, what about individual differences? What about skill level? What about this, that? There are so many factors. It's a multifactorial issue in that way. So I'm very much in favor of having this alignment of theory and data. Let them develop together, and also, let's be real about the evidence status. So that's what I try to do in this series, evaluating what has been established and where can be the edge. Now, having said that, these differences are often not very large between learning methods. You can argue both ways. If you're in the practical field like you are, you can say, what we have, we stick to it. This will be people's inclination, right? That is what they know. That is what they are not ready to throw away their old shoes before they have new shoes. But they are never interested in learning the new shoes because they know the old shoes work. But you can also argue the other way. Well, there's not much danger in trying something else.
That's a great point. In Article 1, Motor Learning and Update, you write down 3 reasons why you do an update. You have also 2 general considerations, where you talk about what is optimal learning and you talk about deliberate practice. You also talk about desired difficulties, but one point struck me. You also talk about cognition and automatization. And this is a topic where I wrestle with. So cognition and automatization in some approaches plays a big role, and in some approaches it seems cognition is gone. From my little understanding of constant bled approach, I'm not sure where the cognition has gone, but I have a feeling that cognition is important. Maybe not in the direct sense if I like evade a punch or doing something very quick, but to make a tactical plan to.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I fully agree. I don't know what point I made exactly in that first article. What I remember about the first article is that I pointed out the importance of some degree of resistance in the learning process.
Yeah,
so the deliberate practice and the theory of desired difficulties are different theories, quite different theories, but they have in common that there's a degree of resistance in the learning process to make it productive.
Yeah.
And of course, you can in the original learning theories like Smith's theory and Adams' theory, etc. It's all about the development of cognitive representations, and so cognition plays a leading role. Yeah. But later on in the theoretical developments, you can read that as a de-emphasis of these explicit cognitive reflections. Yeah. So like implicit learning, like differential learning, like constraint-led approach, they're all examples of reducing the elements of cognition. And then of course they vary in the degree to which it has a place, etc. I think now you see more balancing. So I don't think motor learning or skill acquisition can take place in any absolute sense as purely an explicit process or purely an implicit process. Of course, both elements are present, and that's inevitable. The question is, what can I gain if I place some more emphasis on for instance, implicit learning, and what do I gain then, and can I substantiate that? And there's always an element of automatism if you become really good at something, because it means you become proficient, you become efficient, you become. And we know that if you think about your movements all the time, or if you're very reflective about that, that's not going to be beneficial.
And what is automatization in the sense that, so a little bit context. So I grow up with, especially within the police, that if you do enough reps with your firearm to pull it down and pull it in and so on, automation occurs, and you don't have to use your working memory, and it's stored in long-term memory and so on and so on. And it was seen as a big advantage, because then you had some room for
sure.
But yeah. Is this still?
And that still holds. So I don't know exactly what the point was in my article. Maybe you misread something, or maybe I miswrote something. That could all be the case. But surely there are many elements of movement. I mean, you have to realize that the motor system is a highly complex system in which many levels of neural control occur, many of which we have no conscious know of, and that's a rather good state of affairs, because it would be impossible to move if we would know what would going on in the spinal cord, or what, etc. The issue is that I mean, the term cognition covers many aspects, so maybe that's part of the confusion. So do you mean by cognition, I have to think about how I move all the time? At a certain point of skill development, that is no longer desirable. And the question is it desirable at the beginning? So, and that's an interesting question. But if you talk about strategic choices or what I'm now going to do in this situation, of course, it's very good to have the cognitive capabilities in that regard, and a game plan, or steering your attention deliberately to something. All these aspects, yes.
Yeah, so I can imagine that you constantly make a switch between. This is purely non-scientific, but my intuition is that you switch between, like, if I'm in a kickboxing match, when the match begins, I have some strategic plan in my head, and then of course in the movements itself, it's more like interaction with the environment, and I go back to my corner. I have a little reflection about what my opponent did and so on. So
sure.
It seems continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the stream of consciousness never stops.
No, exactly.
But we have, of course, the three-stage model of motor learning of Fitz and Posner.
Yeah.
So, where you go from a more cognitively oriented phase, verbal, motor phase, associative phase, to more autonomous phase. And I think that still captures many important aspects of motor learning. What I've come to learn over the years in relation to expert performers is that there might be a fourth stage where cognition can help to improve specific aspects of the movement. So what I noted, for instance, in those jugglers that I mentioned, is that, of course, also expert jugglers make mistakes, and if they are small, then they can correct for that mistake while they keep on juggling. Lesser jugglers typically fall apart. But also another example would be, someone like Pieter van der Hogeband. He could say something like, okay, in my swimming skills, I can, if I turn my hand a little bit more on the outside, with my thumb towards the side of the swimming pool, then I'm more efficient. And he could then change that without changing the whole pattern.
Yeah, well, that's great. So you have the unconscious and conscious processing at the same time. It's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, well, also, let's say that you're able, we know that about expert performance, that they know more about their skill than the less expert performers. So they have more knowledge about it is what they are doing.
Yeah.
And so they can also reflect on specific aspects of the performance, of their own performance, and change it at will.
Yeah. Great. So the implication is then, the consequences then, how do we teach? I've always had the impression also, this is maybe, I'm not sure what you think about it, but when I started to get involved in implicit learning, largely because of your articles, and we started a program at the police and we did implicit learning, I had the impression that to teach implicit, I had to have explicit knowledge. Like,
yes.
Yeah, so that was a kind of, yeah.
Yeah, but there's an important distinction to be made that I also made in I think also in the series.
Yeah.
And that is the perspective of the coach, trainer, or instructor is another perspective than that of the coachee, trainee, pupil. In the sense that I think oftentimes the trainer or instructor sees a certain element of the skill execution that needs to be improved, that is not the right way, or certain ideas about how it could be done more efficiently. And then typically what happens is that the instructor or trainer tells to the one who is learning what should be changed. It's the one-to-one translation, you could say. But the point is that what the image of the trainer of what should change is not the image of the one who is learning. Schillhorn, the author of the differential learning, that's why he calls this alien feedback. So it's not shared by the one who's learning. So the art for the instructor coach is to translate that what needs to be changed to something feasible for the one who's learning.
Yeah.
And that's a very important point, I think. And that's not so easy. That's an art. That is something, that the one trainer coach is better at than the other.
Yeah.
And it depends, of course, on the skill, how good the solution is.
Yeah.
To give a little example, if I may. So I worked once with some trampoline jumpers in Amsterdam, in Alkmaar. And together with their coaches, and there was a session. They were learning to trampoline jump, and so there was a session, and I asked, okay, what is it that you would like to change? Well, there were two things. They were not jumping powerfully enough in the trampoline. And the other one is when they were on a vertical rise out of the trampoline, they were too wobbly, shaking their upper body too much. And I said, okay. And the point of the coaches was, if I instruct them to change that, maybe it's a little success, but not very strong. So I said, okay, what else can we do? Are there other ways to change this behavior? And it was an open session, so I invited solutions from their part. And they came up with two interesting things, I thought. So the first was to place a big bull's target underneath the trampoline. And then say, well, try to hit the bull's target as closely as possible. That became their new task. So rather than saying something about the explosiveness of the contact with the trampoline, there was a distal goal for them to achieve. And the other one was they put a pointer at the sternum of the jumpers. And they say, well, if you make sure that the red line on the wall is purely vertical. So again, so these are nice examples, I think, of the use of external focus of attention. But you have to come up with those things in the situation.
Yeah.
And they will be different depending on the skill you want to learn.
Yeah.
But those concepts, I mean, I said in the introduction that the differences between theories are often very small.
Yeah.
But external focus manipulations have been proven quite powerful. The evidence base for that is quite strong. Although also about that theory, there's debate. But yeah.
Yeah, well, you make a nice bridge to your second article, which is about external focus of attention.
Yeah.
I see, especially with my USA colleagues, they are very, how do you say it, involved in external. Dr. Lewinsky from Forescience, for example. And in your first article, you lay down the evidence for this and so on. And how is it today with external focus of attention, in the sense, what is the evidence? Is it applied on the sporting fields? What is your thoughts about external attention today?
Yeah, well, also because perhaps of my series, or because of the evidence base, or I don't know, but it's used quite a bit, I think, because people have experienced that it may help, it can make a difference. There are some concerns about if you if you look at the movement pattern from the perspective of coaches in sports, for instance, but also physical therapists have from, okay, it should look in a certain way. The movement pattern should be executed in a certain way. And then the question becomes, how do you do that when you have only the emphasis on the focus of attention? Yeah. So there you might see a certain tension between the concept of a focus of attention and the desire to change something about the movement. But as in my example of the trampoline springers, jumpers, you could use that. You can use the focus of attention to change something in the movement.
Yeah.
For instance, if I say, well, very simple, it's all about reference in a certain way with regard to the environment. I mean, in the swimming movement, at the end in the crawl, in freestyle swimming, when you move your thumb if you rotate it to the side of the pool at the end of the stroke, that's going to be favorable. So you can say, well, you have to rotate your thumb, but you can also say, well, point your thumb to the side of the pool. And that's more effective than saying rotate your thumb. So,
and why is it more effective? And maybe it's the same question. Why is it more effective? And what are the benefits? From what I've learned, I want to check it with you. The benefit of external focus of attention is that it is more resilient against stress, pressure. Is that correct?
I associate that more, with the implicit learning story.
Okay.
But it makes the movement efficient. So if you talk about neural efficiency, so when you organize a movement, in the way in which the motor system apparently operates, which is in a certain hierarchy, starting with the goals, what you have to accomplish in the environment, and you set up your instructions accordingly, then the movement execution becomes efficient, and also it follows, as it were, what it is that you try to achieve. So the goal of the movement is much more important
in how you get there.
Than how you get there, but also as a means of manipulation. For instance, in physical therapy, you can say, okay, now you have to stand still with your foot on the ground, distribute your pressure equally over both feet, and as a means to reduce, for instance, unstable balance. But you can also do something else and say, well, grab this curtain and make sure that the curtain hangs still. To achieve the same. But the instructions are very, very different. Also the situation is a little bit different because you have tactile information about the curtain, etc. But okay, let's leave that aside. It illustrates the idea, I think.
And what would be an example, for example, in martial arts? Let's say I have to make a straight punch. I can say everything about my feet, so how they should stand. I can tell them to rotate. I can tell them to keep their elbows not here but there. But what would an external focus of attention deliver an explosive punch?
I don't know about this specific situation. Of course, the example that you give, is about the movement as such. You're also giving the punch for a reason. You want to attain a certain goal with that. So I think to answer earlier question, so why is it that this is important? What's about the organization of the motor system? But the motor system generates movements to accomplish certain acts.
Yeah.
So it's about the actions. Yeah. And the actions, well, are, let's say, render the movement meaningful. With the movement, you want to accomplish something. So you can say, well, okay, I want to, your approach to the punch can either be, I want to punch, have to look the punch like this, so it should satisfy certain movement characteristics. Then your instructions will also be about those movement instructions. Yeah. But you can also say, well, I want to have a powerful punch. Meaning that you want to have a big impact on a certain surface. Now you can use the surface as a means. For instance, you take a cushion and you say, now hit the cushion. And then you have a certain indent on the cushion. And then you said, now, okay, do it again and make sure that the indent is twice as large.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and then you're operating to make a powerful action.
Yeah.
And that's the difference then.
Yeah, I was once at the Amsterdam Combat Lab. I'm not sure. I think John van der Kamp was also involved. I'm not sure anymore, but they had a punching bag with all those sensors, and you could you get immediately feedback and so on.
Yeah.
The last thing about my last question about external focus of attention is I'm a psychologist and I work sometimes with clients who have they have trauma or they have a lot of arousal and so on, and I do a lot of body-mind exercises like a body scan or even maybe some yoga and so on. So to feel your body and to have a real internal focus in your interoception, everything. My question is there a place for internal focus of attention in performance or in other modalities of movement?
In one of these articles, I point to a common conceptual mistake. Not that you are making one now, but then they say, well, okay. For instance, you want to kick the ball in football in the goal, and people say, "Well, now focus on the on the boards on the side of the field," and they think that is external focus of attention. But that's not how it meant. It should be in the context of the task, right? Of course, the internal focus of attention can be relevant to the state in which you are in performing those tasks. Yeah. So if you relax and you have meditation and you're aware of your bodily signals and you use that to prepare and execute the task, I think that can play a role and be beneficial. Yeah, but the internal focus of attention is more about giving instructions and so on about the movement itself, rather than the effect of the movement. So that's something else in the theory than being aware of your internal bodily signals necessarily.
So you're saying what we are talking about is feedback strategies or coaching strategies. It's not so that's different than have an awareness of my feelings and so on.
Well, you can also, as a coach or instructor, focus on that, but that's something else. I'm trying to say the issue of internal versus external focus of attention. Yeah.
I was years ago. I really liked the Niederfer quadrant with the external, internal, broad, and small, and I think we used it a lot in police training. I had the impression that the officers also liked it very much because they had some language, when have a broad external focus, when have a small external focus, and so on. But do you have any idea where Nidever is today? I'm not he himself, but is the quadrant still a useful coaching tool, to your opinion?
Well, in the theory of attention, it still plays a role, and you find it in sports psychology books. It's a different audit scheme than the internal and external focus of attention. I think in police work, it's I can see the relevance of that. I was thinking about that because there you have complex situations where you have to almost do the impossible, be focused on on the detail of a suspect or a potentially dangerous situation, or what have you, certain characteristics of the environment and the situation you're in, while at the same time being aware of the whole environment. So that's quite difficult, I think.
Yes, and there's a lot of scientific research into self-regulation strategies in police. For example, Professor Judith Anderson, she recently visited the Vrije Universiteit, and she did research about breathing strategies to regulate arousal in officers. But we have also, there is a little bit tension between, and I also asked her in the podcast that to be aware of your arousal and to regulate it seems a little bit moving internal, and you have also the suspect before you, so there is but maybe it's like.
Well, but that's what I'm trying to say. So you can distinguish the state you are in.
Yeah.
So I was talking about this Jim Quick early on, and he has this. Quick translates to fast.
Yeah.
And he says, okay, how can you learn fast? And then he has 4 important points. So one is forget what you know. That is the F. So open you up for the new information. I think that's very important. When then the A is be active.
Mm-hmm.
So be actively engaged. I think that's something else than purely motivation. You can say I'm motivated to learn something, and then sit down and wait till the teacher tells you this and that, rather than doing something active with the information. So he says, learning is not a spectator sport. I quite like that phrase. And then S is the state you are in. So how open are you? In what mood are you? In what are you stressed, or are you positively open towards learning? And also the T is interesting. The T stands for if you've learned something, teach it to someone else, because then you learn it twice.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. The fast learning point, because there is a lot of emphasis on the difference between performance and learning, and then we have the desired difficulties, and that performance and training is not the same as performance on the street or on the field and so on. But I think Dave Collins, he's a professor from the UK, and I talked with him, and he saw some places for fast learning, for explicit instructions. Say, for example, if you have never been on a rock with the climbing gear and so on, you better learn fast and use some explicit instructions, isn't it?
No, absolutely. Well, that's also the basic point about your first driving lesson. If you have no idea about the mechanics of a car, it's going to be quite hard. So there's very useful explicit instructions for making a start, but also at more advanced levels. If if someone else says to you in mountaineering, well, You rather make your grip like so in handling these instruments. It can make a quick difference. But oftentimes you see, especially when the movement is concerned, that an instruction like that doesn't work. And then the question becomes, can you give an instruction that helps changing the movement for better outcomes? I was a squash player in my younger years. And I was playing here in Amsterdam, and Amsterdam is a place where a lot of good squash players hibernate, so to speak, in between big tournaments. And the one guy there was Dan Kneip, I believe was his name. He was like in the top 10 of the world, so extremely good squash player. And he said, well, you have a nice game, but your backhand is hopeless. And I say, okay, how do I change my backhand technique in squash? And then he said, well, try to, make the stroke by pointing your elbow to the ball in the corner when developing the stroke. Wow. And it was beautiful. I mean, it's such a simple instruction that every squash player can execute. You can just try to do that. And again, this external reference, what we're talking about. Rather than say you keep your shoulder like this or keep your elbow like that. That's typically not going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So can we move on to Article 3 about implicit learning?
Sure, if you dare.
Yeah. By the way, this is this is for the. I want to make some PR for Hanno van der Loo and Sportgericht. And here you can find all the articles. It's in Dutch, so you also have to learn Dutch, but there are international.
We have very simple translate programs these days.
Yeah, so it's not. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So rather than unpack the whole thing about implicit motor learning and so on, from what I understand, implicit motor learning, and we talked about it, is more stress resilience. Some forms of implicit motor learning are trial and error, observational learning, using this is a difficult word for me, analogies, metaphors.
Yeah.
So what you wrote about it some 10 years ago. What is the state of the art of implicit learning today? Is it practiced by coaches and trainers? Is the evidence still there? And what kind of methods do you like or prefer?
There's certainly evidence for it. Well, it goes back to the distinction between implicit and explicit learning and implicit and explicit knowledge. So the issue is, what is the nature of the knowledge that you accumulate when you learn and that you keep on board, so to speak. And Masters, in his original work, showed a tendency, I would call it, that if you are stressed, that you're better off with implicitly learned skills than with explicitly learned skills. But also that when you learn implicitly, you learn as good as when you learn explicitly, which comes back to the point I made previously, that oftentimes, there's not a big difference between ways of learning. But when you test then in a certain way with the stressor that was being introduced, you see a difference in how the skill is instantiated in the participants in this case. And so there's a general insight that implicitly learned skills are more resistant, not only against stress, but also against neurodegradation all kinds of effects. An elderly person will all of a sudden hears the samba and has learned the samba before and stands up and go dance the samba, although consciously controlled movements are not so easy anymore. So that's difference. So that makes implicit learning, I think, a very generic and important issue. Well, the extent to which it's being used, I don't know. Because it depends, I think, also on the realm. Again, here it's the same. How do we translate the idea of implicit learning in practice? So Rich Masters, he spoke at the National Coach Platform in April of this year.
Yeah.
Online, so in the middle of the night, because it is in New Zealand, and he mentioned the acronym SWORD. I think a sports coach came up with that, and SWORD means stands for the 6 ways of implementing implicit learning. So introduction of a secondary task, the S.
Yeah.
Observational learning, the O, and analogy learning, the A. The R stands for resultless learning, and the E for errorless learning, and the D for directed subliminal input. So what is that? Well, for instance, if you have a volleyball net and you place it a few millimeters higher, the volleyball players won't notice it, but they have to jump just a little bit higher to make a smash. And you can keep on doing that. You can, of course, apply the same in police instruction. Think about shooting at the target. You say, okay, this is a 10-meter shot or a 20-meter shot or 50-meter shot, whatever. And you put the target a little bit further without telling them. And say, what is happening to your efforts is lower than what's been before. Try a little harder. So that's a very simple example. I think observation is also straightforward. It means, it's the old story of monkey see, monkey do. So you can explain a whole lot and bombard someone with instructions and verbal information, but also say, watch closely and attentively, and make sure that you're going to behave similarly as what you have seen in the professionals or the examples that have been given.
But with observational learning, Peter, recently your colleague Vanna Hutter wrote an article called The Criteria for High Quality Police Training. She also talked about observational learning. And also I recently interviewed Karin de Galan. She's a very good trainer and she wrote a whole book about observational learning.
Yeah.
I myself learned a lot from watching some great people, also in police and sport, just, to watch them move and so on. But at the same time, if I'm demonstrating a technique, it seems a little bit in contradiction with, for example, more explorative learning, because now you're just copying me. I'm not sure if I'm asking it very understandable now, but
yeah, I see what you mean. Well, as I said in the beginning, there are many ways to Rome. And it's not the case that all these theories about motor learning are internally consistent with each other. So both may have different revenues or benefits. We should not try to make one fully consistent picture of all motor learning theories.
That's true. Yeah.
So exploration can be useful, but so can be observation. And so can be imaging, for instance. In the end, the actor, that is something we do know from research, has to perform the movement physically, him or herself, because, that ultimately is the best way of acquiring the skill.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know how practical the introduction of a secondary cognitive task can be. Perhaps it can be. For instance, if you're in a drilling regime, you start talking about other things. How was your holiday in Mallorca? And you can develop the skill without reflecting consciously about the skill. So that could be also readily applicable. Analogy, I think there are analogies that you use. Think, for instance, there's certain, you know more about this than I do, but there's a certain technique for, warding off danger. Or, for instance, someone grabs you by the wrist. What do you do?
Yeah.
I know one technique is called the snaking technique, where you keep on turning.
Yeah.
Well, that's an analogy, the snaking technique. So that way. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So an analogy in a sense is, you can think about it. Well, of course, it's something you say, do like so. But it can be very powerful because an image communicates a whole lot in a simple way, and a lot of that is subsumed under that.
Yeah.
My son, he was doing Pukulan.
Pukulan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, here in Amsterdam when he was young.
Yeah.
And they have these, you could say animal metaphors. How do animals move? Like a snake or a monkey or what have you, bird, tiger.
Yeah.
I think he started out with those four. The crane, the bird was a crane. And they are characteristics for certain movement patterns. So a young kid like my son, 6 years old, learning Pukulan, also being an animal friend, but Pukulan, and it's a powerful analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
At one point he got disappointed because they introduced now new animals.
Yeah. That's, I can imagine. Yeah. Where's the there must be a more dangerous, bigger animal. Now if you have done the lion, you're finished. You have to move to the elephant.
Yeah. Oh, he was an animal lover. He thought, all animals have a certain movement repertoire. That helps them survive.
Yeah. So implicit learning still going strong and there are many methods. And
and there's application. There's continuous research on it. In various directions. Also in relation to surgery, laparoscopic surgery, dentistry, complex movement skills. So in different fields.
Is one burning question I always have is, we are now talking about, in a way, about movement, about motor learning, but there are also, and I'm not an expert in it, but it seems to me there are also other ways of learning, like learning on school. And I know, for example, that Paul Kirchner, he's emeritus professor of educational science. He's a very, very almost aggressive proponent of direct instruction. And like it's about teaching on the basisschool, like writing and
primary school.
And but my question is motor learning, does it also apply to what is other learning, to learning knowledge? So to learning the law or to learning what can you learn more?
Well, I rather see it the other way around. So in my first chapter of the new series that you were referring to, with the work of Bjork and Bjork on the desired difficulties. That is more work that has been predominantly done in the educational context. They give some examples of motor learning as well, but it's a more generic idea of learning. And so are, the optimal challenging point. It's a more generic idea. So I think there are certain generic features of learning that also apply to motor learning. And that's also why I turned to this literature and to this guy, Jim Crick, and others. I'm interested in what is out there about learning. So you can, you can ask yourself the question, how specific is motor learning for learning in general? Of course, you have the physical instantiation. But I think there's a bi-directional transfer of insight and knowledge. But back to your point about the explicit instruction and the how shall we say it, more the commanding style of learning, of the rule-based style of learning. I think that could be a core dichotomy that you can make. I read an interesting point. I don't know who made this quote, but about the Phoenician people learning Phoenician language. Of course, there was in a time that there was no instruction whatsoever about learning the Phoenician grammar, and it was all about listening and reproducing and then learning the language as you go along. So we have evolved to a state, I think, where we should have, frameworks, rule-based approaches, cognition-dominant approaches to everything we do. My position is that I think that has gone much too far, and that we have neglected these, evolutionary ingrained ways of learning. And also the fact that we are part of the animal kingdom.
That's very interesting indeed. I talked with Wolfgang Schulhorn about this, about kind of what are the historical, societal, economical pressures on learning. Like I can imagine in industrialization, like the fabrics and so on, that it's the more, like 20 children on a row doing, the reproducing.
I think there's of course we have the Industrial Revolution where everything was mechanized. We have the legal structures. You have to be responsible, so you have to have a protocol according to which you operate. And you have to evaluate the protocol, all those things. So the natural basis of human behavior can become threatened, I think, if you do that too much.
If it's okay, can we just touch on two topics?
Sure.
That is constraint-led approach and ecological psychology, and then wrap it up with differential learning. And first, because
are those 2 or 3 topics?
Those are separate topics.
Yeah.
But first, the ecological approach. If I'm right, at the Free University, you had for a long time what we call ecological approach. If I'm not right, I'm not sure if it even originated with Tambour, because they talked about relations.
No, that's not correct.
That's not correct?
No. Yeah.
Dat is another discussion, relational and substantial.
Well, of course. Well, I was smack in the middle of that development, so I can tell firsthand what happened. So John Whiting, he was my supervisor. He wrote the book Acquiring Ball Skills, published it in '69. Which was quite remarkable at the time, because he said, as psychologists, we should stop, doing all these reaction time experiments and study real life skills. So acquiring ball skills was a first attempt in that direction. And John was someone who had a very good nose for new developments. So at one point he came up, well, there's some new kids on the block, Turvey, Kelso, Googler. We should invite those people and see what they bring to Amsterdam. And Kugler, we met. I was there too because he invited me as a very young PhD student for a conference in Maastricht to meet some of those people, and Peter Kugler was there. But the first who he invited to come to Amsterdam was Ed Reed, and he is unfortunately he died young, but he was the author of a theory of action systems. So it's very much aligned with the work of James Gibson, the founder of ecological psychology. So it's a very evolutionary and biologically oriented theory that tries to explain the behavior of animals, including humans, in terms of their environment and their interactions with the environment. So ego stands for eagles, which means house in Greek. So it's a fear of behavior in the environment of animals, organisms. Animals, I think, is a better word, because in organisms that move and perceive and so on. Yeah. And then Michael Turvey is also an exponent of that approach. Although he was blending it also with physics and mathematics, much more than Ed Reed did. And then a lot of people at the Faculty of Human Movement Sciences, as it was called at the time, latched onto that and started doing work with that. So Reinhard Bootsma, Lieke Peper, Geert Salzberg.
What was so attractive for you at the ecological approach?
Well, I came from philosophy, and I was quite at an early age. I was grasped by the mind-body problem and how to conquer it. And the ecological approach, held the prospect, if I may put it that, of overcoming that dichotomy by saying, well, we have some objective circumstances of the environment. The affordances, you can sit or stand on something, and that is objective something. And as an observer, you can observe those affordances and then play into them, or perhaps you do not perceive them, but you can learn to perceive them, become sensitive to them, etc. So I found that appealing, and it also struck me as an action theorist, as something that could help the theory of action much more forward. I was interested in how do movements evolve and how are movements used in the everyday world.
Yeah. So from there, I think it's a logical step to talk about constraint-led approach. There were many other questions I would like to ask you, because in Netherlands we had the history of, like gordijn, tambour, substantial via relational. For me, it seems related, but more maybe it's.
Well, Jan Tamboer was very interested in this because, if I may say something about that too. Of course, the theorie bewegingsonderwijs of Gordijn, a Dutch theorist, pedagogist, he developed this theory of bewegingsonderwijs, so the education of movement, which was against the old notions of the physical education, so he said, well, the idea of physical education is to induce young people into the world of motor meanings. So what does it mean to sway on a cord? What does it mean to jump over obstacles? What does it mean to play and dribble with a ball? Things like that. So rather than educating people in a physical way, making stronger for other purposes, health or whatever, he emphasized this relational aspect, and that was the background of Tamboer. So when this ecological approach came to the fore, he was quite interested in that.
Ah, okay.
Naturally, because it made a natural fit. Yeah. And then I said, because I once at one point gave a lecture for physical educational people in the Netherlands, also the bewegingsonderwijs people. And I said, well, now you have a scientific theory with which you can further develop the theory of movement education. But that requires that you do experiments and measure, which is not strong in that tradition of Gordijn and Tamboer. Yeah.
So let's move on to the constraint-led approach. In especially American police training, there is a huge how do you call it? There is a huge interest in ecological dynamics and more constraint-led approach, especially through the work of Rob Gray. He appears in many police podcasts and so on, and also in Germany, Mario Staller, Sven Körner, professors of physical education, talk a lot about this. What is the constraint-led approach, and what are your thoughts about it? This is a little more general.
Well, the constraint-led approach is based or goes back to the triangle of Newell, you could say.
Yeah.
Well, if we look at action, movement in the action context, you can distinguish the organismic constraints, the environmental constraints, and the task constraints. And this forms the triangle. And he said, well, we should understand the problem of movement coordination as the confluence of those constraints in the coordination. And also you can look at development and learning in that way. So you can change the organism, you can change the environment, you can change the task, and that will all affect the outcome in the form of movement patterns. This was not a theory of learning at that point, but it could be developed as such. And this was done by Keith Davids. And that led to the constraint-led approach. And that's the insight. If we manipulate or change those constraints in a sensible manner, you can affect the behavior in a desirable way. And use that as a context for learning, which places then much emphasis on the environment as one of the poles for changing. So if you talk about situational awareness and decision making and action, they all take place in an environment. And if you want to use that notion in the context of skill acquisition. Well, skills always play a role in the environment. I mean, look at the police skills. Yeah, the environment is very clear and sometimes threatening and sometimes complex, and etc. So they introduced then a lot of notions related to that, like what is the information in the environment that matters? What are the affordances in those environments? What can be done? What can be unfolded as actions? And then there's the notion of representative design. So now how do I make those environments in a learning situation in such a way that they are representative of the real life environments for which you are doing the learning. So, and I think that's one point where there's let's say a counterpoint is being created relative to the traditional learning in police skills, where you have more like the standalone approach or silo approach, where you have an isolated skill. You follow the traditional linear line. Say, I make this skill and that skill A and B and C, etc. Pistol drawing, shooting, arrest, and self-defense skills and things like that. And then I put them together in a more complex situation. They take issue with that. They say, you can also reverse that, for instance. You can also, nowadays there's the body-worn cameras. Yeah. You can show the footage. You can start there and say, okay, what does it mean to be in this situation? And then simulate that information, perhaps in VR environments that are realistic, that deal with stressors, etc. So that becomes then the constraint-led approach. You also asked me what I think of it. I have some reservation about the lumping together of dynamical systems as a theory with physical psychology. Although I'm not denying that in the situation that we're talking about are dynamic situations. But you see it's latching on. You noted that. I noted that too. And in many different contexts, again, in medical training, in police training, in sports. So part of that is, I think, because it gives a handle that it is applicable. And there's also some tools that can be used in that regard, like the GROW model that they have, which is a straightforward model in a sense, where you say, I have a goal, something I want to accomplish. There's a reality that's like the standing situation. What is the skill level of the people involved? What is the environmental context? And then we have some options for doing, and then which is the O in the GROW. Yeah. And then we have the W, which stands for will, what I'm actually accomplishing, what I will do. And then I provide feedback for that. So instructors and coaches can implement that. So where it becomes important, okay, what is it that I wanted to learn? What can I do to help them learn that? How can I make that realistic, etc. So I think it's fair to give them credit for that. It's one of the domains where I see that this point that I raised before about how much evidence is there relative to the theory formation. Against the theory formation tends to go much faster. and then the evidence accumulation. Perhaps that's always the case, but I think some more rigorous testing can be done and should be done to test the tenets of this theory.
Yeah.
That's practical value.
Yeah, I'm not sure because you wrote an article about this. What is the conclusion about its effectiveness compared to other methods of motor learning? I'm not sure if I wrote it down, but I know Rob Gray has, for example, on his website, he has some table where he summed up all the research and the comparisons. And
I should look that up. Yeah, I know he has done some research himself in the baseball.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. About hitting to the part of the field that you typically don't hit to when you are a right-hander or left-hander, etc. How you learn that, and he came up with some clever solutions that proved to be effective. In the new series, I'm very much interested in not single studies so much, but more the systematic reviews and the meta-analysis, and say, okay, if we blend everything together, what can we say? But there's a growing evidence, and there's also a new series of books about constraints-led approach, which were very interesting, and that testifies to what I said before, that the approach gives handles, allowing practitioners to implement learning environments in their training. And they can use things like implicit learning and focus of attention. You can all implement that right in that environment. Differential learning, likewise. So you can also think about it in the sense of some kind of
meta.
Umbrella approach. Yeah.
So if I'm reading it correctly, because this is your beautiful paper in Sportgericht about.
So there's pictures of Newell and Davids.
Yeah, and I think if I'm correct, your conclusion is very positive, and of course there's always the need for more research and so on, but it seems one more question is, I'm not sure who said it, maybe Schulhorn or another, but it struck me a little bit that is constraint-led approach a kind of behaviorism, in the sense that you can manipulate the environment in such a way that you get a desired behavior. I
don't know exactly. I have that concern too, and I think I also expressed that in the article. Schorn has more a theory about how is it that we learn, and why is it that we learn, and why is differential learning more effective as a learning strategy than other forms of learning. And that is not really present in such an account.
But I can imagine that if you as a coach, you can fall into strict behaviorism. This is just my thought process, because you can manipulate the task, environment, person in such a way that only one solution becomes possible. So it's a kind of,
I think that's of course it is an approach that operates at the behavioral level of analysis.
Okay.
But you can set up an environment. What I emphasize a lot is individual differences.
That's true.
Is that there's not one style, and that people need to find their own solutions. I think there's a lot to be said for that. By changing the constraints, vis-a-vis a desired training goal, you can create an environment where an individual athlete or an individual police officer can explore solutions and find a solution that works for the person in question. So it's not, it's not Skinnerian in that regard, where you say, well, I want to have this behavior and not that behavior. And,
So let's move on to the last part. That's differential learning. You also had a great illustration, which I hope I can also use. I will have to ask, of course, yourself and so on. But this was
this is, I'm paid by society.
And this is the beautiful Olympic rings with the different methods.
Yeah.
And it's nice. And you also talk about the commonalities between them. But there is also the last part of our talk is differential learning. And I talked with the founder, Wolfgang Schöllhorn.
Yeah.
And it also seems to me very much like athletic skills model approach, but I'm not sure. But what is differential learning? And I have to, if I may say so, your paper on differential learning was a kind of critical, if I'm correct. More critical than on CLA.
Yeah. Perhaps I'm critical of both, but I'm also positive about both. I think that should be the science. I mean, I think Schöllhorn certainly has made an important contribution with his theory, which is interesting. It emphasizes the role of variation in skill acquisition by means of the argument that if there are differences in executions and outcomes, information is being generated that guides the learning process. So hence the term differential learning. And I'm critical of the notion of stochastic resonance that he uses for that, so that there's a point where these changes resonate with you and that you then develop in a certain way. I see that as a rather metaphorical application of the notion of stochastic resonance. But perhaps because he has more to offer theoretically, in my sense, I'm also more critical. What I found very interesting, because he also spoke in April at the National Platform, and there he introduced some important elements, I think, for variation. How do you bring about this variation? And he introduced a certain hierarchy where you say, for instance, you're learning boxing movements. If you go to that, well, if you're young, you see an old movie by Muhammad Ali, or maybe a newer movie by Tyson, and you go imitate that, right? You make the postures that belong to that, and then so that's the first level, and then you continue and you say, okay, now I make more velocity in that regard. So that's the next level, and it's about changes in angles and so on when making those movements. But when you become really good, it becomes about accelerations and about derivatives of acceleration, about jerk. It becomes fluid, and the timing becomes correct, etc. So depending on the stage where you are in your learning progress, you can set up different schemes for differential learning.
And what is the difference between CLA and differential learning for those who are not, how do you call it? are not knowledgeable about these. How does differential learning looks like if I'm going to the gym or going to the range? What the range is maybe a strange example, but how does differential learning look like?
Well, differential learning, if you take a skill, for instance, rifle shooting. I went with my family to a range near the Great, Grand Canyon, and there was a range, and could shoot, clay pigeons.
Mhm.
And there was this, it was really a cowboy ranch. There was a cowboy, and he had this rifle, and he shot the clay pigeons from all possible positions, behind his back, underneath his leg,
Yeah.
turning around. He couldn't care less. He was very proficient at clay shooting,
Yeah.
pigeon shooting.
Yeah.
And so you can ask you the question, how did he learn that? And how did he become so proficient? So you can make those changes deliberately when
Yeah.
you practice clay pigeon shooting. And that would be an instance of differential learning, rather than that you said, well, keep your head still, postures fixed, feet on the ground, core stable, hold your rifle like this, and then try to shoot at the right moment, which would be a totally different way.
Yeah.
And so Sjoerd calls that traditional learning, and he is introducing all these variations to have the optimal learning result. That's the idea.
Yeah.
So it's not that the other ways don't produce learning results, but differential learning is the way to go.
And what is there a difference in practical application with CLA from what you?
Well, variation plays a big role in the CLA as well. So
Yeah.
at the conference, I sent, because Rob Gray was also present, albeit online. But I sense some tension there also. Because then, okay, who holds the conceptual ownership of that? It's scientists are children. Let's put it that. They're worried about things like their intellectual legacy. But I think Sean Shirley is the one person who put the notion of variation after Dick Smead.
Yeah.
Gave it new fuel, you could say, and gave another dimension. Because in Smead, you still have the notion of an ideal movement pattern that you're able to execute under different circumstances. A forehand in tennis, on a clay court, on a grass court, with a wet ball, with a dry ball, with great length, with short length. That's the story of Smead.
Yeah.
And also variations around that ideal, where the order and the characteristics of the action are fixed. Schiller is abandoning that and say, well, we don't have form optimization, we have outcome optimization.
That's nicely said.
So the goal is to achieve that, and the way to do that is uniquely different, and even in the individual itself. One moment is not the other moment. It's changing all the time. It's fluid. Your state, as we discussed, changes. The one day you were in a perfect 5 or 10K, and the other day it's much less. Why? It's one of the secrets, I think, of high performance sports as well. If you would resolve that question, why is that variation there? Variation plays definitely a role. It's the core of the differential learning theory, and it's an aspect of the constraint-led approach. Which, as we said, is more like an umbrella theory also.
So
Yeah.
in the Netherlands, there is what is called the athletic skills model. I'm working at the Academy of Physical Education in Amsterdam, the ALO.
Yeah.
Where we have a lot of teaching in ASM, athletic skills model. To me, it seems very comparable with differential learning, although I'm not so into it. But do you have any how do you call it, experience with athletic skills model or?
Well, I know what it is, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also the notions where you develop your skilled competence widely along many dimensions. But it's in my understanding, it's a bit different from differential learning.
Hmm.
And differential learning is more about how do I learn a specific skill best.
Yeah.
And then the variations that are surrounding this. The notion of the athletic skill model more says, well, this athletic competence is a multidimensional construct. So if we start out with at a young age, it's also meant for young people, developing different kinds of skills in a broad spectrum.
Yeah.
Strength, sprint, explosive, game, etc. They can develop this athletic competence in a way to their benefit, and then maybe later, differentiate a bit or select one specific sport. But of course, there you see too that certain elements, variation using the environment to have different forms, also play a role.
Yeah.
But Jeroen and Savelberg and Schoen have collaborated. So, as I say, that you showed the picture of the Olympic rings with those approaches. There are many commonalities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that makes also the present field difficult to read, and I can imagine that someone in practice, when he or she reads all of this and they say, okay, now can I see the wood for the forest? What should I do?
Yeah.
It's not so easy to answer. I would be inclined to say, well, see what you resonate with, and try to apply that. And don't be afraid to experiment somewhat, because the learning individual is quite robust. The idea that you can spoil something, I don't think is so large.
Oh, that's a great advice. Yeah. And if they read this article of the rings, you also beautiful describe the 5 commonalities. So maybe that's also a handle to.
Yeah, but that's also we still need to have a way to go to turn this whole field. I mean, the field of the scientific study of motor learning to practice and make and I think with my series and my interest, okay, what can we really give evidence-based? I mean, we're talking about science after all. What can we evidence-based to practice that stand the test of time and that really is helpful in very complex situations like yours with the police that are far removed from the laboratory for sure, but also often for field experiments. So that's one of the issues. So how can we bring the data that we gather, and of course we now have technology that allows us to do that better and more, to do field experiments and domain-specific experiments that will give that will be more conclusive about these issues.
Well, thank you for your service for doing your part, because maybe for you it's just like writing some articles for Sportgericht, but for many practitioners in the Netherlands, even today all our ALO students read your articles. I hope
Yes, I know they are popular. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I take pride in that, of course.
Yeah.
And also, if you write a scientific article, if you reach 100 citations with that article over the years, you have done very well. But the articles in this series are read by thousands of people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What question intrigues you with regard to motor learning at the moment?
Well, this question that we started out with okay, humans will always learn. When you behave, you're active, and you gather information, and the learning may be weak or maybe stronger. So the question is, if someone says, well, this way of learning really works, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in, it is not surprising. But okay, how can we learn in a way that is robust in terms of retention and transfer, but also which is effective in terms of resources, time, investment, and how does that look over longer times? Because experimental funding is scarce, and now with this new government, probably comes to an end. So we're not going to have the means to do really longitudinal studies. But in the developing of expertise, I think that is essential. So what can you do? What do you need to do to bring people to the highest possible level, given their initial conditions, if you wish, the genetic disposition, etc. Because that's not deliberate practice. That is more than that and different than that. So also play and mood and emotion and many other things that need to embellish that story or make it richer.
So you end with so much jewels. So we can do another 2-hour talk.
Yeah.
It's okay, but
the lifetime perspective of
that's great.
And I like this notion of scaffolding. That's a notion of Bjork and Björk. So when you learn, and learning is about making something meaningful, and it becomes meaningful if it returns. So you may learn, for instance, the defensive movement. But if you have a one-shot trial and say, well, now we have this session in which you learn this defensive movement, it never shows up again. Maybe a year later in the retraining, you say, well, we train again this defensive movement. That is not a strong model for learning. But if you make it appear, if you make it show up in another context where you have to use it, and see what it means to use it in that context, and you have learned other things, you are building this scaffold in which the things you have learned become richer and richer.
Yeah, that's great. And that's always a challenge as a teacher also, to make it.
And it's surprising because, the humans are emotional beings. So if you attach information with emotion, learning occurs.
Yeah.
So there's also the passive and the active, but also, well, this. If someone tells you a story, wants to explain something, and starts out by explaining what it meant to that person in anecdotal something,
Yeah,
you're interested and you want to know more about it.
absolutely.
So yeah,
Yeah,
and
great.
the same holds for yourself.
Yeah,
When you're emotionally invested.
yeah. So so even if we have all the motor strategies, we still have a lot to
Well,
learn.
I used to have a collection of all the stamps of the USA at
Ah,
a point long ago. Yeah, my grandfather was a stamp collector until I live in Amsterdam, so the stamp collection got stolen.
yeah,
But they have a stamp, learning never ends,
yeah,
and that is true.
yeah. Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure all my ALO students, if will also love this interview because now they can not only read your articles,
Yeah, but also see me.
also see you and
Bold face.
both, yeah, we both and with my glasses on.
Yeah, no, but you're most welcome. Yeah, it was a pleasure doing.
Yeah. So I'll end this conversation and we will, off the record, say goodbye. So thank you for listening. I learned a lot and I'm sure you will learn a lot. Bye bye.